Welcome to WonderPod. WonderPod is the official podcast of WonderFest, Ireland's first online children's book festival. I'm your host, Conor Braden. In this podcast, we'll be discussing everything there is to talk about with children's books. I'll be talking with Ireland's top writers, illustrators, publishers, agents, and more. You can find out more about WonderFest by heading to wonderfest.ie. Now, on with the show. Fáilte go dtí WonderPod an pod crealar ifigil de WonderFest. Welcome to WonderPod, the official podcast of WonderFest. And in case you didn't realise, yes, this episode is going to have a mix of Irish and English, because today I'm speaking to Patricia Forde and Áine Ní Ghlinn all about how important Irish is for children's books, and, in a way, how important children's books are for Irish as a language itself. But first, my guests. Patricia Forde lives in Galway, in the west of Ireland, and as I said last week, west of Ireland is the best of Ireland. She has published 3 picture books, lots of easy readers, and in May 2017, her first novel. The Wordsmith was published by Little Island. She's also written 2 plays, as well as several television drama series for children and teenagers. She's worked as a writer on both English and Irish language soap operas, and in another life she was a primary school teacher. Hey, I'm one of those. And the artistic director of the Galway Arts Festival. She lives with her husband, 2 teenagers, and a dog called Ben in a house in the middle of a small wood. Áine Ní Ghlinn is a bilingual Irish journalist, poet, playwright, children's writer, and she is our current laureate Minogue. Áine also shares the unique distinction that she is the first ever laureate of Ireland, laureate Minogue, who writes exclusively as Gaeilge. She has written poetry, non-fiction, fiction, and even plays for children and teachers, and all of it completely as Gaeilge. I won't lie, I was quite nervous doing this interview, and you'll probably hear it on my voice, not only because I was speaking to 2 excellent and inspirational writers, but also because I wasn't that confident in my Irish at all. But within mere moments, both Trish and Áine made me feel exceptionally welcome, comfortable, and ready to go. Aré nos, seo é an aglah. Patricia Forde, Áine Ní Ghlinn, gur míle maith agah for coming on to WonderPod. Thanks so much. And how are you both doing? Trish, how are you doing today?
We're just enjoying some lovely 23-degree sunshine in Galway. So I'm kind of happy with that. And it means I can't do too much work because it'd be a shame to waste the weather.
You're very good for coming in from the lovely weather to talk to me. And Áine, Conas an too.
Gama, Níl an aim sean leiclí a Conas atá in Gaeilge, ach tá muid ag sort hart ar 5 km Celsius. So I had a long day's work behind me. I didn't take the day off, but I'm all set to go.
Great. So you want this to be done so you can rush out to the last of the sunshine.
Well, I don't think you'd get a tan in the weather that's out there at the moment.
You wouldn't. So my first question for the 2 of you is Conas a chosníonn tú I leabhar páistí agus an sin I leabhar Gaeilge. So Trish, toss ar dús mar.
Yeah, well, hasí se scríb I Merle mar Harlíonn sé. Scríb me leabhar mar thugann siad early readers are go Egmont. Frogs do not like dragons. Agus ní a clúgam really foin sionsca ní a sagam mór an faoi agus scríb me an leabhar agus go lí me na fáilte thuirí. Agus chalín éarnach a bhí ar a bhón ar a lá sin mar a Harlíonn sé agus díorn nach chuisiach tréis tosnús job agus dúirt si díor mé orthaí céimiid focail atá a banana book agus dúirt si I really haven't a clue, but I'll put you through to the commissioning editor. So, an céidir bheile bhí mé leabhar leis an commissioning editor in Egmont agus dúir siar bhfuil scéal agat céim fáil go gléchar agus dúirt fé agus dúirt si bhfuil inis chum faoi agus rinne mé mo bitch ar a bhón sin ceacht do chula gona bhí ré le rud a cinnte rá mar dúirann siad ort céad faoi de leabhar agus dúirt sílam é chur hickey hain agus dailsigh siad é. So chas mé mar sin agus ina dhíth sin rinne me cuasa bhí cuasa ar siúl ag taid má gona gán I fotafatas spidal bhí cuasa ar siúl ag do chéine a bhí a géirí picture áir scríomh agus bhí mé páirteach ar a gcúrsa sin, agus an leabhar a thug mé lom ar a gcúrsa ná Kitty Cearc, agus daid siig taig é sin in dhéana an cuasa. Agus rinne mé ceircinn de feitiúir leis na dhé sin agus srá lí sin agus inis cúpla uaisce. So bhí an tálam go nearna mé an cuasa.
Ínta. Agus ceistap an bhfuil an cuasa fós an inis nó an bhfuil an cuasa déanta?
It's the kind of course that happens irregularly. So o am de chéile nuair atá scríbnú i nua stoid testáráid rinse cuasa. So duine bit bhfuil séach go an just si beidir scéile chu hiige agus am cinse go méis cinúvis an kit ganile. No a mai kit an kit ganile an.
Gníad go míle. Áine, cafi fuúta, Conas hosnín tú ag scríb. Ar hosnín tú ag scríb go fáistí agus in sin Gaeilge, nó an bhfuil tú an raibh tú ag scríb a Gaeilge an tamar fad?
Bhí mis scríbing Gaeilge an tamar fad, níor scríb mé an tean uair gur scríb mis inrod as béarla ná. Bhí mis gobar mar iriseoir ar fear rain blianta. Agus mé gobar le radio na Gaeltachta, le RTE, le Germany de Friúla, ach bhí mé gobar in London ar fear cúpla blian, agus bhí orm nuair a bhí mé London, bhí orm tasnú ag scríb as béarla. Agus bí an béarla me chéad theanga, ach bhí Gaeilge gom an lua, ach ó hebh na scríbhneoireachta de, bhí mé gcónaí scríomh as Gaeilge, agus fam se dachar an isis dul scríomh as béarla. Agus faoi láthair fiú tá fáilte chomháin ag irí orm eisteáin béarla a chur ar fáil de chuideanna thuairscealta tá gan díagóirí, agus tá sé smuoine bhar iad ailsiú béidir más féidir leis I dangacha eile seachas béarla nó Gaeilge, so tá sé géirí iad áil eistrathe go tangacha eile orpacha is tócha, ach chuige sin caiimiise eisteáin béarla a chur ar fáil, agus tá sé cho dachar. Or ní léon tá hí go mar bheith scríomh as béarla. Ach da thosaigh mise ag scríomh filiochta de chuoine fásta, agus an sin thosa mé ag scríomh do dhéagóirí, agus iaragorm roint leabhar ólais, dír an gúm orm cúpla leabhar ólais scríomh de dhéagóirí, agus is ina dhéag sin a thosaigh mé ag scríomh de fáistí. Agus an sin lean an scríbhneoireacht do fáistí raig go háirithe nuair a bhí mo fáistí féin óg. Mar bhí mé ó bhíos anna óg, bhíos ag cuma scialta do chuoine óga. Ach ní raibh mór an fáilte thuirí an a bhí fáiltiú as Gaeilge do chuoine óga. Agus an sin go toban bhí an sort pléasca seo agus idir an gúm cá slifa, fod de fata, clóir chonacht, leabhar brac, éabhlóid, leabhar cóir. Anis tá siad ar fad ag fáiltiú leabhar de fáistí as Gaeilge. Agus tá si go húntaach ar fad ghuiile méid sin ann, ach sin Gaeilge an tanga scríbhneoireachta dumsa.
And you said you worked as a journalist, Irishore. Do you miss that at all, or do you just much rather?
I do actually, yes. I loved journalism. I've kind of gone all around the house in terms of career. I spent a few years teaching, a good few years in journalism, maybe 15 years in journalism. Then I did some lecturing. I still do the occasional bit of lecturing, and I've gone kind of back and forth all the time. I was writing on a part-time basis, alongside all those other things, because it's very hard to be a full-time writer. And then I actually got a wonderful opportunity from First na Gaeilge, where I applied for and got some funding to do workshops. And I started doing workshops with young people. And for the past 15, 20 years, on and off, I've been doing workshops with First na Gaeilge, Poetry Ireland. And I managed at one stage to actually survive as a writer with workshops in the background and a little bit of lecturing. But now a lot of those things are gone by the wayside, partly because of COVID and also partly because just of I've been pulled in other directions, let's say.
Well, one direction you were pulled in, which I'd love to know more about, is you are the current laureate na Nóg. So could you finish them piece of biog for you and laureate na Nóg, and then tell us what your kind of day-to-day, or maybe it'd be better to say week-to-week duties would be, because I'm sure one day isn't the same as the next.
It varies, you know. Sometimes it's really, really busy, and sometimes then you have lots of time to write. the idea of the laureate was that it would be an honour, an opportunity for someone to write full time. And there are duties and roles that go with it as well. You're an ambassador and you are trying to do your best for other writers. It's not just about yourself. It's about children's writers in general. And in my case, it's very particularly about Áine Ní Ghlinn, the Fáistí, because I have set as my mission the idea of trying to get young people reading more and more as Gaeilge for pleasure. I have worked with trainee teachers, trainee primary teachers, and I have been shocked by the fact that a huge number of them come into third level and they've never read a children's book in Irish. They don't know how to read as Gaeilge. The only reading they've ever done is what they've learnt off for their Leaving Cert or Junior Cert. And I've been quite shocked by that. I thought, my God, children should be enjoying reading as Gaeilge. Fuineog chultúr is an léthireacht. Agus fuineog, mata fuineoga go der fehe cultúr is as far. So if you can read in as many languages as possible, so much the better. What that does to your mind is phenomenal. So Tom Shikinala Dina Oga a spraga chun níos mó léthireachta dhéanamh as Gaeilge. Ceann rudí a rinnemer ná feachtas. So we set up a campaign called, no, there is a campaign there, Love Leabhar Gaeilge, which does incredible work. We decided to set up one called Give Leabhar Gaeilge, particularly specifically for children's books. And what we've done through that is we've just made loads and loads of videos. The bookshelves here behind me, they've never been on as many videos as they have in the last year and a half. And so we Give Leabhar Gaeilge, the idea of it is to try to get adults to give a Leabhar Gaeilge to a child as a gift. So the child learns to read as Gaeilge for pleasure. And the other big thing that is in hand is that we're working on a Buska Leabharlanna. We're working on a box of 25 excellent books, some of the best books that there are as Gaeilge. And we're working on giving a Buska Leabharlanna to as many schools as possible in the country, all depending on funding, and all of that will be revealed. There are lots of things I can't talk about at the moment. So they're all the things that go on in the background, but there's an annual lecture that has to be done. There's the Buska Leabharlanna project, Give Leabhar Gaeilge project. Sometimes you're asked to do a piece at a festival, and just get all sorts of different things come up, and you're doing those. There's a brilliant manager for the laureate, Angela Flannery. She's the project manager, and she's absolutely amazing because she organizes and I do. So I appear and she has all the work done in the background. So it's not a day-to-day job. They're just little snippets of what goes on, but there's a lot to be done. But I still have had loads of time for writing as well. And because of the laureate, I've actually been in a position, I was doing some part-time lecturing, and I'm now in a position where I'm walking away from that for the moment anyway. Maybe I'll go back sometime in the future, but for now, I'm just devoting myself to laureate and writing. So it's brilliant. It's a luxury. So I'm thrilled to have the honour, and I hope to do the best I can for Áine Ní Ghlinn agus léthirí na Gaeilge.
Gohíntaach agus bhhaithlam Buska Leabharlanna mar sin heile chun Moscow.
Má échan tú Sea of Children's Books Ireland beag bailach le coristeach.
Gohíntaach.
So there'll be a whole process for that. So don't forget to apply.
I won't. I'll keep my eyes peeled and I'll tell all my other teacher friends to do the same. Trish, I have a question for you because I think it's important. Aside from fluency in the language, chadiad na dúshlán nar atá tú ag scríb as Gaeilge. An bhfuil sin níos deach ar scríb as Gaeilge nó scríb as Béarla, nó an bhfuil si an rud chéine?
Well, Dunam sin gárod agus lebe fear nach ní ag méin difriocht. Cai tú teachtan ar le scéalte plota tá láidir, charactéria tá simúil. An taon rud a churn Instagram hain is ní bhíon sagam riamh céim fá mar is smuoineam ar smuoine go leabhar. Ceachí mína sagam an Gaeilge nó Méarla tá sé. Ach bína sagam a gcónaí. Nuair a thugann se thugam, dearm le mé na gcónaí is scéal in Gaeilge sin. Agus beidir go bhfuil na híbhána sin agam ima agna agus tá na focail in Gaeilge a golób níos fearr ná na focail Méarla. Se deacarí sin a bhíú ach bínas agam a gcónaí gur go bearlam scríb in Gaeilge. Agus cosca le Áine fáim an dachar agrán béarla a dhéine do leabhar Gaeilge agus vice versa really ach tá sé beagán níos measa ceapan ó Gaeilge go béarla. Mar is teangacha an difriúliad agus tá sé deachar é sin a lámh seo. Ach ó hí dúláine cai tú bhean an scéal a chuma agus is teanga sóc fotlach í an Gaeilge ceapan. So orintanta le picture leabhar, bíonn sin níos deocra bheith gunta agus scéal ancient tíbiste de chuig chéad fóca. Agus orintanta bíonn tú géirí níos mórrá agus cai tú seoirhaid sin. A beidir go bin just mise ach fám níos deocra sin íon an Gaeilge ná Méarla. Achas bralin bheith scríb an Gaeilge, mar a dúirt Áine, céirnar lé mé mór an mar fáist an Gaeilge, ní dóin gur mór an ar fáil, ach bhí an tálam bhí múnteirí ionfach agam a dine scéalta an Gaeilge hún, agus chosamir is scoil lán Gaeilge ar go slán gear áit sort bracad bhí an agus ceapan gur fós bracad táin, ach bhí a lán Gaeilge na múnteirí, agus Gaeilge fád a leabharmar, go dtí gur ág mé an scoil sin ar bhí me de. Agus ó thosamir agus scoil go dtí sin, chuala mé an méid sin scéalta an Gaeilge, go mórmhór scéalta finscéalaíocht agus na tasólaíocht na cineáil scéalta sin. So bhí kind of réim a cheann agam go scéalta. Agus mar dúirt Áine tá ceapan bhfuil sé antáhachtach go léoch daoine sa teanga. Mar tá tú géirí scríomh sa teanga sin, cai tú an sort template a bheith agat a cheann, cai tú na habertí a chlustáil agus réim an teanga a hiiscint. So yeah, I don't think it's any different in terms of skill, maybe, other than, as you say, fluency is important. I think rhythm is very important. So speaking the language, knowing the rhythm of the language, the sound of the language, particularly for picture books, I think. And I'm sure Áine knows this as well, ó bheith scríb filíochta.
Yeah.
You want that particular rhythm.
Áine, I know you've kind of already said in at the start that when you moved to London, that was the first time you had to write in English. But do you have anything to add to what Trish said there? And will she róia or níos iachara? Is that right? See, I'm not even getting my Irish right, but I'm trying, and that's what's important. Is it more difficult in Irish and English for certain things?
Well, it was so they scríbham in Gaeilge bháin faoi láthair, níl sin níos deacra domsa. Ach mar a hála sé, thosa mé ar uorscéal as béarla, cúpla bliain ó hin, agus uorscéal de chuoine fásta a bheith ann ó mégan nuair héimar éis chuige. Tá sé sort curthair an back burner agam faoi láthair, mar go bhfuil am díreú go thomláin ar scríbhneoireacht de fáistí inis le linn Patricia Laureate. Ach díreach mar a dúirt Trish an sin, nuair a hagan smaoinemh chuút I danga a bháin, is tócha gúil níos fearr dul raig leis an teanga sin. Agus an smaoinemh a bhí a gomsa den uorscéal béarla, bhí sé lonathe I London. Agus bhain sé le mar cheanna bháthir, sasna chomhíonntaí. Agus is tócha gur tháinig sé chuam in Gaeilge ar I Méarla ag an am. Ach ní lisa gom fós, nuair a héimar éis chuige ní lisa gom an scríbhí mé I Méarla nó in Gaeilge. Ach sílam héin an dúshlán is smó, má tá dúshlán ann maidir le bheith ag scríomh do fáistí in Gaeilge. Luigh Trish ceanna chun sin scéal a scríomh I méid áirithe focail. Is tócha go muinenn sé sin le teanga ar bith. Ach tá dúshlán eile ann nuair a tá tú ag scríomh de dheagóirí as Gaeilge. Tá tú caint nadidir céimhéad caighdeán Gaeilge. So tá na daoine atá omláin líofa, tá daoine eile atá sort le líofa, agus tá daoine eile atá strachelt. So the book that you might write for abramis an leabhar scríbhá de chuine atá gábhlín déag d'aois, you might end up trying to write it in a language that is lower than the reading age. So you've got all these different reading ages, and the person who's reading Harry Potter in English is not reading at the same level in Irish. Some are, but you may find that some aren't. And because there are much more books that are English, most teenagers turn to reading more and more in English as they move on, because for want of more books. So you end up with that challenge of trying to write a story for the reading age, let's say a story for a 12-year-old in the language of an 8 or 9-year-old.
Áine,
And I don't know if Trish would agree with that.
Yeah, I would. And it reminds me, Áine, of Barrington Stokes. They produce books for children who may have some difficulty reading, but the content is age appropriate. And I ceapan go sin an táchtach sa Gaeilge caitheadh tú cai an tábhair a bheith feiliúnach don íosgrúpa, cé go mbeadh an tanga Beiger níos éascí ná mar is gnách. Agus ó híobh scríbhneoireacht, yeah, that can be a challenge for a writer. You know, I find when I'm writing books in Irish, the most thing I have to do is tone down the language. The note I get most consistently from the father would be, tone it down, that's too difficult, or that's too convoluted a way of saying it. I don't even think it's about difficulty in the language. Sometimes it's a good exercise because it just demands of you that you express yourself clearly and not indulge too much in carrigracha, as we call them, of big words and, you know, things that maybe you kind of indulge yourself in. So, tigam deirtear Áine, you know, cai an tábhair a bheith feiliúnach don íosgrúpa, a cai an tanga a bheith éasca galore go dtugin siad.
Agus an féadlumm sa teachtasteach an sin Conor, díreach hir díomsa an seo, tá leabhar amháin le Trish. Más féidir eáil an sin stray. And that is one of the type of books that exactly what Tricia is talking about there. It's along the lines of the Barrington Stokes, where you're writing for one age level in a language that is kept simple. The only thing I would add to that is na daoine le Gaeilge ana líofa. So the people who are ultra fluent, they need books as well.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to freastal na hís na léthireachta fad agus na hís grúpaí fad. Ideally, you'd be writing the same book at 3 levels.
Yeah.
That you'd write it, if you know what I mean, that you'd write it for, say, for example, I know some of my own books maybe are for 14 years, and they're written in an attempt not to patronize the 15-year-old who is fluent. And yet I sometimes think, well, yeah, maybe you are patronizing them in language because you are keeping it simple, and you're avoiding the carrigracha mar dúirt Trish an sin, ach nuair a dhéanann tú sin uaireanta bíonn ró éasca. Agus thug mé se leabhar amháin a bhí sort leascríofa agam de chuine óg le léamh or a bháin, agus an rud a dúirt sé lom ná raibh sé bhádró éasca dó. Agus difriaste an raibh sé cain faoin scéal, agus tuair sé nó, ach is tanga é de fáistí.
Yeah.
So you can't please everyone, and that's where I see on dúlán is mó.
There is, like, just to expand on that from the education side of it, those Barrington Stoke books would be one publisher that does them, but we as teachers, we'd call them high interest, low ability books. And in the main, just definitely, we need more of them at Gachtanga. Like the one books that it's been mentioned on an episode previous to this, the Dogman series by Dav Pilkey. I'm not sure if it's Dav or Dave Pilkey. They're phenomenal for children with dyslexia or with other issues with reading and taking in language, because the illustrations, and they're just so vivid, and you know what I mean? There just seems to be a general need for books that are that high interest, low ability.
Yeah, and I think too, you know, what we really want to pass on to children is a love of story and a love of storytelling. Maybe it's not our job to, you know, give them a huge amount of like Severus Tongan or more language, but we want them to love to read. And mátá faibanna aca, mátá she dyslexic na kipper, you know, kamad ishni and esco. And I'm a great believer in audiobooks for reluctant readers. You know, listen to it. They don't have to read it. But if we could get them to love stories and wanting to read stories in their language and any other language, that they're able to read in, or to hear stories. I think that's far more important, than anything else when they're little, especially. That idea that books are special and they're, níos táchtaí ná breag on. Mar bhí mo clán hain óg, ar na gcónaí lob, má tá seo go má ceann mé leabhar díobh. And from the very beginning, when they were in the buggy, I would say, if you're good in the shop, I'll buy you a book. So dá siad níos a smaoinne go rud specialty a bhí na leabhar agus go rud, treat mór a bhí antar. And I think we need more of that. We want, when they get to be teenagers, there's such competition. Tá méid eile ar fáil go ar an idirlín agus le clé agus colour eile. We have to fight our corner for stories. And we have the advantage of being able to get our hands on kids when they're very young in school, in primary school. And if we can infect them with a love of reading at that age, and they will then pass it on, keeping with the COVID metaphor, they will just be very
just summarized my entire job of I'm trying to infect them with a grá for leabhar agus a gléamh.
An rud a bhí aine rá go tús, tá sé antáchtach go léthach siad leabhar in Gaeilge go pain, just for pleasure and for no other reason. There's an awful connection in this country between anything to do with Irish and children, and as if they have to learn something, they have to be taught that they should get into through a book. What we're trying to do, I think all of us writers for children in Gaeilge, is to say, look, here's a great story, read it, and read it in Irish, and you'll have 2 languages you can read in. Agus ceapan héann ní sam céir de cheapása, but tá sé bhádnaí stochar nuair tá siad in dhéagóirí leabhar áilgóib, tá leabhar do dhaoine postí óga agus an sin tá leabhar do dhaoine fásta, agus just an salat sin tá si deachar é sin le líana.
Se tá barna an a bhór ann. Ach an dul arás siad na postí óga, sílim goil ról, min luigh tú hain cinál de fust hain canar, sílim goil ról anatháchtach ag na múnteirí. Agus tá sorta fáinne fí an fé láthir, goil anna chuid múnteirí ann nach bhfuil an leabhar a léamh ósáard as Gaeilge. Agus mar bhfuil na múnteirí ábhata dhéanamh agus má ecan na páistí gur seoir, gur job, gur rud DNA, gur dúlána don bhúntóir. That's infectious.
Yeah.
Tógan na páistí sin ó na múnteirí.
Yeah, bhí mis sé le múntar le déine agus sinna cheist chuirsearm dúir tí níl mé soachmach na scéile léamh amach céidians mé. And I said to her, tá srát deasig tíidir cethir scéal an le áitiúil an túidir ag léamh scéal mé nó eistóirá léamh, duine sin cúpla lá ag tús na seachtaine, agus an sin ar an ine le tú héine. Anybody listening to somebody reading a picture book, it's not a huge stretch, for 4 days on a video and following along will be able to read it on the 5th day. So I think, people just need to have a little bit more confidence and be prepared to put the work in and learn, but it's not a huge effort. I think tá Gaeilge chula múnta. So just maybe, that confidence to make sure you're pronouncing the words correctly or whatever it is. Ach, tá na háisna muintin in it. You can now get hold of audio of Irish language books. You can certainly get it on that and DGR. And there may be other things that I'm not aware of, but I just know that one because I've done a few of them. And this will tell you, when I was recording that book, whichever book it was, I think it was the Dragoon that Anne has there behind her head, I was mispronouncing something myself. And the producer said to me, actually, it's this, not that. And I was delighted to be corrected. I was delighted to know that I could, if I was going to be reading it for a lot of children around the country, I wanted to know I was doing it correctly. So I think there's no shame in learning, So I would say, Níl seg na páistí go bhfuil tú ará ceart nó mícheart. Ach táach a marger Áine, táach go bhfuil Funne van het foie agus go bhfuil síime go an agus go tú bant taine bheas tá sin bhhain táchtaí ar lom ná go me chuilead crín ceart mar orintanta ní bhíon.
Now, this next question is a weird one, and I know that, so forgive me in advance. But there are people out there like myself who are very passionate about how important Gaeilge is. Tíre gan tanga, tíre gan anam, rudí mar sin. Ach níl an confidence or a bheith ag caint as Gaeilge, let alone ag scríb as Gaeilge. And sometimes there is a there's not really a barrier but there's a perceived barrier to getting involved in ruddy Gaeilge or Fud na Tíre. So what would you say to those kind of writers? We might start with you, Áine, who care enough about Irish that they want to write in Irish and get that importance out there, but maybe they're not 100% confident in doing it. What would you say to them?
I think that's a very difficult question because for example, I would have a certain amount of Spanish, but I wouldn't have the confidence to write a book in Spanish. Therefore, I wouldn't write a book in Spanish. But if I write a book as Gaeilge and somebody translates it into Spanish, wonderful. So I think write the book in the language you are comfortable with. Get it published in that language. If it's good enough to be published in English or whatever your first language is, go for that. And then if you are really passionate about having it translated into Irish, there are translation schemes around. And personally, I don't see any wonderful point in translating from English to Irish, because I think if a book is available in English, children will read it in English. But it has a value, and I know lots of people would disagree with me. It has a value in terms of learning the language rather than anything else. But if you are passionate and you want to get your book translated into Irish, it has to be correct. I know recently I was sent a review copy of a book by a particular publisher. It had been published in English. It was also published in Irish and in several other languages. It's a picture book with about 500 words, and I counted 15 mistakes in the Irish version. Now, I can't.
That's a lot for only 500 words.
You can't. It's not acceptable. No. So I would say if you want to write in Irish, get your Irish up to scratch. But otherwise, write your book in English and see, can you get somebody to translate it if you really are passionate about having it out in Irish, but don't put out a book that has errors. You wouldn't do it in English. If you saw a picture book in English with 15 grammatical or spelling errors, and some of these were typos that obviously the publisher didn't recognize. And, it's not acceptable. Yeah. And I'm looking at that book now saying, will I review it or will I just put it to the side? What do you do? Because if I were to review that, I would have to be very, very hard on it because it's not acceptable. So my advice to people is write the book in the language you're comfortable in. And if it's good enough to be published in that language, then see about getting it translated into whatever other language there is. But personally, I love seeing translations coming in from French, from Spanish, from languages, books that aren't available in English. I love seeing those translated into Irish. I don't personally have the same value on having, let's say, Harry Potter translated from English into Irish, when I know that the person who's going to read it in Irish has already read it in English and is really doing this. This is where it comes in as homework and schoolwork.
Yeah.
Because schools use those as, and of course, publishers need these. They need the books that sell naturally. So I'm not criticizing publishers. I'm not criticizing translators. I'm saying that my view is translate from languages, translate books that aren't available in English into Irish. Wonderful.
Just being the devil's advocate, Áine, the one thing I would say is I know of children who wouldn't have the confidence maybe to read a book as Gaeilge, go fleis or go pain, but would read a Harry Potter because they've already broken the back of it. Tá scale or olasaca. So now it's only the language and they can follow along. So it might give them a little bit of money. You just hate to see exactly what you said. I mean, I'd hate to see teachers using it as homework. It has to be kept for pleasure, that if they want to read Harry Potter in Irish because they're interested in seeing how does it sound in Irish, well, that's great fun and that can be a really nice thing to do and might get them into the idea of reading an Irish book and seeing that they are able. But yeah, you'd hate it to become some kind of homework. Just on translation as well, one thing I don't know about you, Áine, but I absolutely love to see Mishegus and Dragoon has been translated into a lot of languages. And I was really lucky I got to go to China a couple of years ago to a festival to read Mishegus and Dragoon, which was just hilarious. And I was there and there was these little kids coming in with their blankies and their teddies and Mishegus and Dragoon in their own language. And that was just absolutely moving, to see it. And I think that is fantastic, the Irish publishers. And I suppose go more mar golana go mar fotfata tá méid sin lear a díaltach go páirlear agus chun siad an béimir sin agus tá na leara a scríbhan muid an seach a gáil ar fud na Cruine agus is brala me sin mar scríbná.
Ja, sílim go sin anhachtach ar fad agus tá ober úntach déanta ag fud na fata agus tá feilseoirí eile déanamh na hibric céanna anis ach tá écht déanta cosisiúd mar dúladar isteach I barc a bhí folamh agus ní rá picú leabhar ann nuair a bhí mise fás níos. Sílim go raibh picú leabhar a bháin a gomsa as Gaeilge agus mé a fáiste. Don na chuid is smó bhí siad a méarla agus ní rá si dam as Gaeilge. An sin thosaigh an gúm ag aistrú leabhar ó Theanga Chéile agus bhí siad sin a gom. Agus an sin bhí roint aistrucháin a gom ón méarla an leaba dimí chúis. Bhí siad sin a gomsa as Gaeilge ach ní ra bhís a gom go raibh siad aistrithe. Ní ra bhís a gom go raibh siad ar fáil a méarla. I didn't even realise until I was in my teens that they were actually translations. But I think translations have a definite place, but especially for me, translations to languages where the book is not available. In the other language of the country.
Yeah. No, it's interesting from someone who's new to this debate of translating from English, popular English books to Irish. It's never something I thought there would be a debate about. I always thought, but I totally understand your point, Áine and Trish. I see the child who is even in Harry Potter agus an sin mar diggin sibh an scéal beidir diggin sibh an teanga níos mó, but at the same time they'll, like Áine said, they'll be less tempted to read Harry Potter as Gaeilge because they've already read it.
Yeah, they'll definitely be.
Well, I look at one of my own sons who read all the Harry Potter books, God knows how many times. And I know we queued for the last Harry Potter book. Myself and my 3 sons queued in Eason's until midnight, until the last book came out. And the excitement was something else.
Yeah.
But my eldest son would have been an avid reader when he was a kid. And he actually read the translation, the Irish translation as well. But he said afterwards, somewhere about halfway through, he just said it was a chore to read it. He said, I know every line of this book.
Yeah.
And why am I reading it? Just because it's in Irish. And he would have had Irish as a first language.
That's what I was going to say. He was fluent, so it was more of a chore because he had nothing to gain from that,
Yeah.
But I go in and out of schools, or used to before COVID, used to go in and out a lot into primary schools. And I remember one school, I won't say where or I won't name the school, but one particular school where they were all reading. I was asking them what they were reading, and they all mentioned a particular book that was translated from English. And this is what they were reading. And I was asking them, in the school, I was chatting to the teacher, were they reading anything new? And sadly, the teacher said, no, this, because they've read it in English, I know they'll learn more from it.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, that's homework. Yeah. That's learning. That's not pleasure. And the children were reading it, but they weren't kind of laughing about it as they would have in English or whatever, because it was suddenly, it had transferred from being pleasure to schoolwork.
Yeah.
It shows how important it is. And like from the teacher's perspective, again, before I go on to my next question, that's one of the things is so hard to get over when you're a teacher, to defend the right to allow children to read for pleasure, if that makes sense. Because the kids are only in front of you for 5 hours and 40 minutes a day. So you feel like and the curriculum is so overloaded, particularly in primary level, that you feel like you have to jam pack every single minute with learning. And it took me a while anyway to recognize that, well, actually just sitting and enjoying a book, whether it be as Gaeilge or as Béarla, is on the topic. And if you can if you can get over the fact that they're not necessarily learning, but that they are learning a life skill and a love for something, that then it's okay. You don't have to have it in your Clips Me Soon.
I'm laughing at you there when you're saying, you know, only 5 hours, 40 minutes a day. And I'm thinking, my God, I remember birthday parties where after 2 hours you're saying, are the parents coming now?
Yeah. And the front door.
Only 5 hours, 40 minutes in front of junior infants or 6 or 7 year olds. It's a lot of work.
It is, but it's a whole other skill set, isn't it?
Yeah.
So now, what are some tips, seeing as you're talking about birthday parties and all that, what are some tips you would give to any parents that are listening that really want their children to love Irish and to love Gaeilge and allow us Gaeilge? Ach, beidir míle lang Gaeilge ag na hismahorí sin. Like, what kind of things would you say or give to them?
I'd say picture books, lots and lots of picture books, because you can go at it bilingually. You can look at the cover, and you can spend, if you think of Tricia's Mishags and Dragul, you could spend an hour on the cover of that before you'd ever open a page. And there's such an amount to get out of every picture book. Myra Zepp's books as well. And there are loads and loads of writers who have written wonderful children's books as Gaeilge. And I would say start with picture books. On Laura Leov, few more will Gaeilge wahagut. Ir erchine ella, I know rather in a Colcarter Lumsa Isasana. I've cousins in the south of England, in Cornwall, who wanted to read some of my books as Gaeilge with kids, and they asked me would I read them aloud and send them the MP3. So I read the books, and you know, they little kids in Cornwall were able to look at the pictures and listen to me reading. I think we probably need more audiobooks for those sort of parents, but it's very hard to actually get that sorted. What would you think, Trish?
Yeah, I do. I think from a parent's point of view, I think, first of all, to show some support for the language, some love of the language yourself. You know, even if it's only saying Dún an Doras, see she's an ish, you know, of few sentences, to let them see that you, like everything with kids, they look to you, they look to the parent to see what's normal and what isn't. And then after that, I would say absolutely read picture books, and use my trick of keeping it as a treat. You know, and say, we're going to have a big treat tonight, we're going to read this book. And I wouldn't differentiate too much between English and Irish, because particularly at the 3, 4, 5 years old, that age, you can achieve an verler fad anyway. Most verler talk about it on the you can achieve really. So, you know, often they will read the pictures and they'll make up the story themselves. And, you know, I would be, if I were a parent who was trying to encourage my child to have a love for the language, then I would be really happy if they knew a few words, and when they're talking about the picture, half in English, half in Irish, and they say Áine Ní instead of birds, or they say ocean and dragoon, you know, I'd be really happy with that, because it's a mindset more than anything else. I hear so many parents saying, oh, I'm worried because my own Irish isn't good. It's not really about that. It's about showing the child that you wish you had better Irish, and that you love the language, and that we can have fun with it. And it's an odd thing too, you know, if you don't have much Irish, then you and your child are learning at the same pace. And that can be great fun for the child. You know, they're used to you being way ahead of them. You know everything, they know nothing. Whereas when it comes to this, you know, so, you know, we can have fun together. We can make mistakes together. We can, you know, spend, you know, maybe mealtime, you try and speak in Irish. And we did a lot of that when our kids were growing up. And it became great fun, because, you know, I used to say to them things like, well, you can't eat anything you can't say, so you better know what it's called. And, you know, they used to say, I want to starve, Mom. I said, I don't think you will. But, you know, you can have games, be fun, lighten up is the big advice I would give. Some people wear Irish like it's a ton weight, and somehow they're going to ruin their child's life because they didn't say it correctly, or they didn't have the right whatever. You know, it's our language. I guess it's Latsa, and I just think even if your fluency isn't great, don't let that put you off. You have a right to it. It's your language. It's your children's language if you want it. And of course, the other huge part of me would think, like anybody who would say to me, I'd love my children to have Spanish. Well, what's the first thing I'd say? I'd say, well, learn Spanish. So kaitu rinchai briana chun do Gaeilge héine ausú agus, just kind of make a big effort gomach do Gaeilge héin sogma.
I'm laughing.
Does it come to Reintina a rinne Duolingo lilin COVID?
Oh yeah.
Agus dreidar tá se anmá. Tá gom duine bháin agus tá an líomh tacht a bhíocha cé agus í óg tá sé reisirí cé ish. So Duolingo is a very easy way. You can set your Duolingo to do 5 minutes or 10 minutes a day, and you can pick up the language, and that would give you confidence if you want to read stories aloud to your kids. There's also, I remember a number of years ago, a program came out called Gaeilge, and it was a program with a book and I think a CD, and Gaeilge basically was language for a parent in terms of, slán, cuireart de chóta, dún an doras, all the little things that Trish was mentioning earlier. And so something like that can be of help too. But I think a lot of the barriers that used to be there are broken down. In a funny way, one of the things that fascinated me over the last number of years is I think the influx of people from other countries into Ireland has done a huge amount for breaking down the barriers, because children from other countries, a lot of them are coming in and they've no barriers to any language. Some of them are coming in with 2, 3, and 4 languages or partial languages, but they see no problem with picking up another language. It's not an issue. Whereas in Ireland, a lot of people have this thing about, oh, Irish is hard, and oh, I have no Irish, and oh, I can't speak Irish. Whereas they can, tá Gaeilge Gaeilge agus úsáid, sin méid.
Agus úintí si an
the hang-ups.
Go bhfuil focle testa bhid daoine, agus tá Duolingo ionach le naid sin. Mar fólam bhí mis an Frankis ar le ré COVID, agus fólam íon tú cúpla focail chuile lá. Ach, is leabhar sin nuair atá tú fólam.
Tá. I often say, just when you were talking, Áine, about the children who come in, agus beidir bhfuil gá nó trí nó even ceire language, no tanga, no lachan tanga. Oftentimes, I'm a teacher 10 years this September, which is a bit, but anyway, oftentimes some of the children who are best at Irish have more than one language at home. It's just like they had to learn English as a necessity, and if you so they immerse themselves in it, they read in it, they watch TV in it, and it can be that simple if it's something that you're really passionate about. But
I think to go back on something that Trish said earlier, that watching TG Cahir, Skill and Lay, or any of the children's programs, that if parents and children sit down together for 20 minutes a day and look at, be it SpongeBob or whatever it is, as Gaeilge. Kids don't even notice what language it's in.
Yeah, exactly. My last main question for the two of you is one that I'm asking everybody, and I'm bowled over by the variety in the answers I'm getting. When you both started writing your writing careers, and Áine, I'll speak specifically to writing for children, let's say, what was one thing or one piece of advice that you just wish someone told you at the start that you know now?
I wish someone had told me how much joy I would get out of it, because I would probably have started earlier writing for children and written more. But I hesitated for quite a while about writing down any of the stories for children that were in my head. And a bit like all the people with Gaeilge, lack of confidence or whatever. But once I started to go with it, to go with the flow, the joy it has brought to myself in terms of lifestyle, in terms of career, is just amazing. I love what I do. I hop out of bed every morning loving everything I do. And I'm extremely lucky because I see people dragging themselves to work whereas I just absolutely love, I can't wait to get to the next story, or I can't wait to edit this story, an imaginary friend, and I'm dying to see what's going to happen to that character, where they're going to go. So that's probably it.
Brilliant. Coffee food, Trish.
Ceapan don inseocht in a cinint go me gnám go gaithfidh tú rudí a ascríomh a rís is a rís stella. I think I thought you wrote it once and it was either good or it wasn't. You passed or you failed. So when I first started submitting stories and I was getting notes, I just thought, oh, well, kind of will miss off ma. And I just thought this must be so embarrassing for the publisher to have to tell me these things, you know, because all their other writers are obviously just brilliant and they write it down, it's published. So it took me a long time to stop beating myself up about that. You know, I needed somebody to say, it doesn't mean you're a bad writer. I see it now like writing is like a photograph that's being developed. And when I send it out, often it's not quite sharp. The negative isn't fully developed. It's a bit blurred. And what the editor does is they bring everything into focus. So things I was trying to say and that I half said, they get me to fully say. So Sinead was fresh in the year and the Gaeilge thought Tusnu Anish, nobody royino thing. You know, it's not an exact science. And editors are well used to giving notes, and even the most famous writers write draft after draft after draft to get that clarity and that sharpness. And I wish somebody had told me that.
My last couple of questions are rapid fire, so don't think too hard about them, don't worry. First one is, could you both name a book you wish you had written or you wish you had, it was like, oh, why didn't I think of that?
I'll run with that one first.
Go.
I don't actually think about books like that because for example, I look at Tricia's Wordsmith, a book I loved. It's a book for teenagers, but I enjoyed it as an adult. And so I look at that and I don't think I wish I'd written it, because if I had written it, then I wouldn't be sitting down enjoying reading it. But if I were put my back to the wall and told you have to name a book you wish you'd written, I wish I had written the Harry Potter series because I would be a multi-millionaire. I could do all the things I want in life with the house, and I could write all the stories I want and not have to worry about money ever again.
Or getting the dinner or hanging out the clothes. All those things on you.
Or you could pay someone to get the dinner. Yeah.
Well, for me, I have to say, I do think I would love to have written The Hobbit. Mostly because I read The Hobbit when I was 10 or 11, and it was a total delight for me to put it down, to leave it. I loved the world that Tolkien created, and really, ideally, I wanted to live in it, with the hobbits. But if I couldn't do that, I wanted to be able to go into that world. I would still today happily sit down and write a new, piece of The Hobbit, write another book of The Hobbit. I would love to be in that world and engaged with it. And it's funny, when you mentioned the word set, and that was the only time I got the chance to build a world myself, a full world. And I think it came from that. I loved that world so much. And as a reader, I found it hard to leave it. So yeah, if Tolkien hadn't been around in it, I'm saying,
Agus ma chefte Deranach, what's one children's book, you kind of already said this, Trish, but there might be another one when I ask it this way. What's one children's book you read as a child that had a big impact on you? Now, I'm not asking what was your favorite, because that can be a different one. What's one that stuck with you?
The one that stuck with me, I think, was there was a series when I was starting secondary school called The Dark is Rising, by Susan Cooper. Agus Vunny Sheen Skelta, kind of inspired of Yeki, the Hudson Skelta anyway, was kind of Finch Gale Brackenish. Agus nuair léime iad sin agus bhí an cultúr sin chomh sa leabharaici, agus is cuimhnam gur cheap mé, oh God, we could do this with Irish folklore and mythology, which I knew a lot about and knew a lot of stories. And just the way she was so inspired by it and the atmosphere it created in those books. And maybe as well because a lot of it was to do with Welsh mythology, and I felt a connection. But I remember they stayed with me for a very long time, and the kind of haunting thing of living in an ancient landscape as we did. So, you know, when I go to the Burren or somewhere, I used to think about Susan Cooper's stories and all the stories that were kind of hidden in those layers of mountains and wild places. So yeah, Susan Cooper.
Agus Áine.
I suppose there were a few books that had a huge impact on me as a child. Probably the very first one was a book called Jimeen Mhór. And it's a book that's available. Antnáthad War has put it out again in the last few years, a modernized version of it. But it was a book about a young boy called Jimeen. And it was a bit like the Horrid Henry character in many ways. He was a bit of a rascal. And when I was 3 years old, my father was a primary teacher, and he brought me to school with him when I was 3, because my mother, the marriage ban, I think, had been lifted or something, and my mother was going back to work as a teacher, and they had nowhere to put me because all the others were big enough to be in school. I was the baby. And so my father bundled me into the car and brought him to school with him, and I was left sitting with my big sister. And 6th class were reading Jimeen aloud. And I just sat there and couldn't believe the magic. And my father was quite a good illustrator. I think in a different world, he might have been a book illustrator. But my father, as the 6th class were reading Jimeen Mhór, he was across 2 blackboards, across a primary school room. He was illustrating the antics of Jimeen Mhór with coloured chalks right across the 2 blackboards. So by the time, it was a bit like what you're saying with kids with reading difficulties. I wasn't in a Gaeilge because there were no Gaeilge in Tipperary when I was growing up. And there were, you know, so, but everybody had Irish. Everyone in the school was fluent in Irish because it was kind of half and half. And my father spoke a lot of Irish to the kids in school. So nobody really thought about language in the same way. But that is one book that had a huge impact on me as a child. And then also I mentioned already on Laba de Mikuish, that I invented all these stories in my head about going off in the magic bed. And I actually, years later, for one of my own kids, I wrote a story which is published called An Laba Scihanach, because I was telling a story not along the same lines as the magic bed, but a different magic bed where a boy and his teddy go on an adventure. And so those 2 books had a huge impact on me, and a million more. I read nonstop as a child. I lived out the country. There were no play dates, nowhere to go. And I read without a break. I just ate books all the time.
And so did I. And I remember my mother said recently, she said, until you were about 15, all we saw was the top of your head. I was always looking down at a book. It was, that's what I said at the very beginning, you know, it becomes an addiction. Má hosting to live, má van tanavas, má higgin to kind of scaliocht, agus golisteach leabhar, agus the calchas the scale. Then I think you constantly want to go back. You know, there is no cure for that after a while.
I don't think it's something we want to cure, though, is it?
No.
Patricia Forde, thank you so much for coming on. Áine Ní Ghlinn, the current reigning laureate Minogue, thank you so much as well for coming on to WonderPod. It's been a real pleasure to get to know you both a bit better.
Gur míle maith agat.
Fáilte gur maith agat.
Gur míle maith ag Tricia agus Áine for coming onto the show. Both of these excellent authors and champions of the Irish language were as inspirational to me as they were kind and welcoming. So, WonderFest is a little over a week away. Be sure to head to our website and find out what events tickle your fancy. Next week, I will be speaking with 2 members of WonderFest's organising committee, Ashwin Chacko and the founder of WonderFest, Sarah Webb. I can't wait for you to finally learn all about WonderFest itself, and I'm really looking forward to seeing some of you at the events next week. But until then, chat you all later. Thanks for listening. I hope you found this as useful, as inspiring as I did. Don't forget that WonderFest is happening from the 17th to the 21st of November 2021. head over to wonderfest.ie to find out how else you can have a whale of a time. See you there!